I didn't plan on becoming the woman who brought an entire company to its knees, but the moment my supervisor told me, casually, publicly, that my bonus wasn't processing right after they celebrated my work without saying my name once, something inside me snapped. I stood there pretending to swallow the humiliation, pretending their cruelty didn't burn through my chest. What they didn't know was that buried deep in their own paperwork was a clause they never bothered to read. One they should have never broken. If you've ever been dismissed or disrespected at work, subscribe and tell me your story in the comments. I knew the moment I stepped into the atrium that the celebration wasn't really for me, even though every graph, every metric, every achievement flashing across those giant screens had come from the system I spent 2 years building. They had transformed the entire 20th floor into a launch party spectacle. Balloons, banners, catered food, executives toasting each other like they'd personally written a single line of code. People clapped, cameras flashed, someone even popped a confetti tube that rained metallic strips across the floor, and I stood there smiling like a guest at a party thrown in my own house. I kept reminding myself to breathe normally, to act like I didn't notice how they praised the team while their eyes flicked right past me. Grant, my supervisor, was in the center of it all, laughing loudly, shaking hands, bragging about the incredible breakthrough, as if he'd been awake during the nights I slept on my office floor to keep the model from collapsing after the contractor abandoned the project. Every congratulatory message pinging my phone felt like sandpaper because I knew none of those people had any idea that the miracle launch required weeks of my unpaid overtime, crisis fixes, and negotiation battles with vendors that Grant claimed were above my pay grade. I didn't mind doing the work. What gutted me was how invisible I became the second the work succeeded. My name was missing from the slide deck. My contribution was reduced to a vague sentence about support. And yet everyone kept saying, "We did it," while I stood in the corner holding a paper cup of warm water like a prop. There's a specific kind of loneliness you feel when your own accomplishment becomes a group souvenir for people who didn't even show up for the hard part. I watched them take photos in front of dashboards powered entirely by scripts I wrote. Someone from finance waved a balloon shaped like a star in my direction, telling me, "You should be proud," as if pride could replace acknowledgement. I nodded because I'd learned the hard way that people like them didn't hear women like me unless they wanted to. Still, something about that moment lodged deep, a cold, sharp awareness that none of them saw me as essential. I wasn't the architect of the system, I was the technician they assumed would always quietly keep it running. But even then, even before Grant walked over to deliver the comment that would shift everything, I sensed a fracture forming. I could feel it in the way he avoided eye contact when he praised the department, in the way the executives praised him for leading the initiative, in the way operations ignored my attempts to correct a mislabeled metric during the presentation. I wasn't angry yet, just tired in a way that seeped into bone. Tired of being the unseen foundation holding up a structure that never acknowledged its own weight. Tired of pretending that being overlooked didn't matter. Tired of acting like this was normal. And somewhere under that exhaustion, something else stirred. Not rage, not revenge, just the first spark of realization that invisibility isn't harmless when the person you're ignoring built the only thing keeping your entire company afloat. I saw Grant heading toward me long before he pretended to spot me across the room. He did that thing he always did when he was about to deliver something unpleasant. Straightening his shirt sleeve, smoothing his hair, giving himself a small confidence boost as if the act of speaking to me required stage preparation. He slipped between the clusters of executives and analysts, still carrying that self-satisfied grin he wore through the entire celebration. And for a brief second, I wondered if he was finally going to acknowledge the months I spent holding this launch together. But when he reached me, he didn't offer congratulations. He didn't thank me. He didn't even look at the dashboard on the screen behind him that was built entirely from my architecture. Instead, he motioned for me to lean in, lowering his voice like he was sharing some harmless little secret. "Hey, quick update," he said, casual like we were chatting in a hallway. "Your incentive payment isn't processing this cycle. Admin stuff, you understand." He patted my arm, actually patted me, like he was consoling a child about missing recess. My brain stalled for a moment, stuck between confusion and disbelief. I asked, "Administrative?" But the word barely made it out before he launched into his excuse. "Upper leadership is tightening bonus policies after launch," he said, already shifting his weight backward like he was halfway out of the conversation. "Nothing personal, just restructuring." Nothing personal. That was the phrase he used when he wanted to diminish something he knew would hurt. The same phrase he used last year when he took credit for my crisis patch during the contractor meltdown. The same tone he used every time he needed me to fix something without acknowledging the work publicly. Nothing personal, as if the weekends I spent debugging weren't personal, as if the nights I spent in that freezing server room weren't personal, as if losing the compensation I was promised, the compensation I depended on, wasn't personal. But it was his flinch that told me everything. When I didn't respond right away, his mask cracked for a fraction of a second. He blinked too fast, eyes darting to the floor, then back up as if he expected me to argue or make a scene. I didn't. I just nodded once because I knew something he didn't. I knew exactly what clause he had just violated. I knew how fragile the license agreement was and how deliberately I had designed it years ago when he and his department tried to cut me out. I knew that my employment status, specifically my compensated status, was the keystone holding the entire AI compliance license upright. But Grant didn't know that. He never read the contract. He never read any contract. "Glad you understand," he said, relieved by my silence. "We'll revisit it next quarter." Then he walked away, his phone already in his hand, probably crafting some self-congratulatory message to leadership about how smoothly the launch went. I watched him cross the room to rejoin the circle of executives raising glasses to future success, unaware that he had just pulled the wrong thread on a tightly knit system. They thought the humiliation ended with a stolen bonus. They thought I would swallow it, smile, and keep working like always. But as I stood there, the celebration noise fading into background static, something inside me shifted. Not rage, not revenge, just clarity. A cold, precise understanding that they had no idea what they had just done. They didn't just deny my bonus. They triggered the failsafe that only I knew existed, and they would feel it long before they ever realized I was the one who wrote it. I didn't storm out of the celebration, didn't confront Grant, didn't demand answers or push back. I simply walked back to my desk with the same calm expression I'd worn all afternoon, the same steady pace, the same quiet posture everyone had grown used to. They thought my silence meant compliance. They never understood that silence is also preparation. The moment I sat down, I opened my secure folder, the one nobody else even knew existed, and pulled up the contract I had fought to revise 2 years earlier. It sat there on my screen like a dormant organism waiting for a pulse. I scrolled directly to the section I remembered almost word for word, Appendix D, subsection 6, paragraph A. My name, my full name, was written there as the designated technical authority whose compensated employment was a mandatory requirement for the license's validity. I traced the sentence with my eyes, not because I doubted it, but because seeing it again grounded me in the truth I had almost forgotten. I wasn't powerless. I had built a system so complex and so deeply entwined with the company's operations that removing me from compensated status didn't just insult me, it destabilized the foundation of everything they depended on. I leaned back slightly and let the noise of the office blur into a dull, Around me, people were moving in and out of meetings, prepping reports, sending messages about next steps after the launch. Nobody suspected anything. Nobody even looked in my direction. It was almost laughable how easy it was for them to overlook the person holding their entire infrastructure together. But I didn't waste emotion on that. Instead, I opened a fresh directory and named it Continuity Documentation, something bland enough to disguise its purpose. Inside, I began organizing files, Slack threads showing who actually wrote the system logic, drafts of architecture diagrams with my timestamps, emails where I corrected the vendor's misunderstandings, version histories of the data models I had personally built, not because I planned to defend myself, but because I knew the company would scramble to rewrite history once things collapsed. People don't accept consequences easily. They prefer to pretend the truth didn't exist. I wasn't angry. I wasn't plotting destruction for the sake of drama. I was simply preparing the truth. Once the documentation was sorted, I created another file, this one far more delicate, mapping every system dependency tied to the license. It was tedious work, cataloging every dashboard, forecasting tool, monitoring script, nightly batch job, and customer analytics pipeline reliant on the vendor's authorization. But I knew the terrain better than anyone. I'd built it. I listed each dependency in columns: system name, purpose, internal owner, failure condition if license invalid. At first the list was manageable, 15 items, then 25. But the deeper I dug, the more intricate the web revealed itself to be. By the time I reached the final layer, the list had grown to 87 critical systems, each one tethered directly to the license like organs tied to a single artery. Without it, the whole body would fail. And because the executives insisted on centralizing nearly everything through the platform I built, the collapse wouldn't be slow. It would be instant, catastrophic. A single break in the chain would snap the entire structure. Still, none of that meant I was ready to pull the trigger. I wasn't. Not yet. Retaliation without precision is just noise, and I don't do noise. What I needed was alignment, a formal recognition from legal that the violation existed. So I opened my email, attached the contract, and typed 4 words: possible compensation discrepancy review. Not an attack, not even a warning, just a subtle invitation for the right pair of eyes to notice the landmine leadership had stepped on. Then I hit send and closed my laptop. I walked past Grant's office on my way out. He was laughing with someone from marketing, probably retelling a version of the launch that made him feel heroic. He didn't glance at me. He didn't suspect a thing. As I exited the building into the crisp evening air, I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about inevitability. Because they believed I was invisible, and invisible people can see everything. The first sign that my email had reached the right person wasn't a reply from legal. It was the sudden disappearance of my access. I logged into Slack the next morning and found myself removed from 2 channels without explanation. At first, I thought it was a glitch, but then the invite to our daily operations stand-up quietly vanished from my calendar. No notification, no request, just erased, like someone had decided my presence was no longer required. I didn't react.